She stood at the head of the table, her voice dripping with condescension. You? You're just useless, Izzy. Always have been. Everyone went quiet. Even her mother looked away like she agreed. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the girl she just humiliated in front of the entire family had built a $60 million tech company from scratch, and today, I had come prepared. I slipped the small folder onto the table and smiled. Then maybe you can explain why your mortgage is in my name. My name is Isabella Marquez, but everyone just calls me Izzy. Well, everyone except my family. To them, I'm still the quiet one. The one who never quite measured up. I'm 29 years old, born and raised in Miami, and I'm the CEO of a $60 million tech company I built from the ground up. Not that my family knows or cares. To them, I'm the girl who sat at the kids' table too long. The one who didn't go into law like my cousin or medicine like my sister. The one who never showed off at parties or posted flashy selfies online. I didn't care about appearances. I cared about work, focus, peace, and, maybe deep down, about proving that I was more than the label they stuck on me. I used to think keeping my success private was a kind of strength. That if I worked hard enough, they'd eventually see me, respect me, maybe even love me a little differently. But all that changed the night Sophia, my older sister, looked me dead in the eye at our mother's birthday dinner and called me useless. It was humiliating, infuriating, but it was also the moment I stopped hiding. Because when you spend your whole life being underestimated, there's a kind of power in the reveal. And I have been waiting, quietly, for just the right moment to take back the room. They say family is supposed to know you best. But what if they never bothered to know you at all? It started the way most of our family dinners did. Overdressed, overcooked, and overwhelmingly fake. My mother's birthday was the one event where everyone pretended we were still a warm, loving family. Where old grudges were buried under too sweet sangria, and conversations danced just close enough to truth without ever touching it. Sophia arrived late, of course, as she always did. All eyes turned to her as she swept in, all glam and gloss and loud perfume. Her heels clicked across the tile like applause. She gave air kisses to our mother, dropped her designer bag on the sofa, and took her seat at the head of the table without so much as a glance in my direction. I smiled anyway. I always smiled. I had brought the wine, the flowers, and the cake, chocolate raspberry, our mother's favorite. I had also quietly covered the reservation at this expensive rooftop restaurant, where the Marquez clan liked to play pretend for a night, acting like we were all closer than we actually were. No one noticed. Or thanked me. They rarely did. So, Izzy, my cousin Ricardo said as he buttered his bread with far too much force. Still doing that computer thing? I nodded. Yeah, still doing that. Freelance, right? Sophia chimed in. Or were you still, what was it, helping someone else start their business? I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped. It wasn't worth it, not at that table. Not with everyone watching for my reaction like it was a game. I've learned to live with the misunderstanding. In their eyes, if you weren't constantly bragging or flashing titles around, then you must not be doing anything important. They didn't understand silence could be power. And I had learned to let their assumptions live, because correcting them only led to more snide comments. But that night, something shifted. I don't know what it was exactly. Maybe it was the way my mother smiled more brightly at Sophia than she had at me all evening. Or maybe it was how my father never once asked about my life, yet eagerly leaned in when my sister mentioned some Instagram brand deal she had just closed. A deal, by the way, that paid less than what I made in an hour. I had flown in from New York that morning just for this dinner. I had a board meeting at 8 a.m. the next day. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and still I came. I always came. So when Sophia leaned across the table, her voice sugar-dipped and venom-laced, and said, "Honestly, I don't even know why you came, Izzy. You never contribute anything. You just sit there like a ghost. You're just, I don't know, useless." Time froze. Forks stopped midair. Even the waiter, pouring water at the next table, looked up. I blinked once. Then I breathed. Then I smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't touch your eyes, the kind that was born not out of joy, but from years of being shoved aside, talked over and dismissed. A smile full of quiet knowing, because in my tote bag, resting neatly by my chair, was a folder. Inside were documents, screenshots, account statements. I hadn't planned to use them. I'd brought them more as a comfort than a weapon. But now they glowed like justice. I reached down, unzipped the bag slowly, and placed the folder gently on the center of the table. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I looked at her, really looked, at the smug tilt of her chin, the fake lashes blinking slowly, like she already assumed whatever I was about to say wouldn't matter. So I leaned forward and said, very clearly, "Do you remember the down payment on your condo, Sophia? The one you got such a good deal on?" She frowned. "Yeah. What about it?" I slid the first document out. "You might want to check whose name is actually listed as the owner." She scoffed. "What are you talking about?" My mother chimed in. "Isabella, this isn't the time for your weird little jokes." "It's not a joke," I said softly. I turned the paper, so the table could see. The Marquez family leaned in like sharks scenting blood. And there it was, clearly printed in bold font. Owner, Isabella Marquez. Not Sophia. Not any cosigner. Me. Sophia's laugh cracked like cheap glass. "This is fake. You're lying. Check with your lender. Or your lawyer," I replied calmly. "The LLC on the deed? That's my holding company. You see, when you couldn't get approved for the loan on your own, the private investor they assigned you? That was me. Quietly. Legally. Completely." Sophia turned red. Her mouth opened, then closed. I wasn't done. "You remember the new car you leased last year?" I continued. "That too. Financed through a shell account I manage. You've been driving it on my insurance." Gasps. Even my father sat back, stunned. "But why?" my mother asked, almost a whisper. I finally turned to look at her. Because I believed in family. Because I thought, even if you never asked about my life, never praised me, never saw me, I could still help. From the shadows. Quietly. Like always. Sophia stood up, knocking her chair over. "This is insane. You think this makes you look good?" "No," I said, rising slowly. "I think this makes me visible." I gathered the folder and my coat, tossing a few bills on the table. Dinner's paid. Again. Then I turned to walk away. And for the first time in years, maybe in my whole life, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. I didn't cry until I got back to my hotel room. And even then, it wasn't the kind of cry I'd been used to growing up. Those silent sobs muffled into pillows, the kind that always ended in me telling myself, "You're fine. It's not that bad." This one was different. It was a cry that cracked something open, something that had been bricked in behind years of swallowing my words, of choosing peace over pride, of never defending myself because deep down I believed them, believed I was somehow less. But that night, something shifted forever. I stood by the tall hotel window, overlooking the Miami skyline, and let the tears fall freely. Not just from pain, but from release. From finally saying the thing I had never dared say before. "You don't get to write my worth anymore." My phone lit up with texts, most from family members still sitting at that dinner table. Messages ranged from confused to curious to borderline hostile. "Mama, we need to talk." "Tia Laura, I always said you were the smart one." "Call me Sophia. You are unbelievable. This is not over." I turned the phone face down. I was done explaining myself. But even as I tried to breathe, to collect the shards of strength scattered across my ribcage, I felt that old, familiar ache. That need to rewind time and ask, why didn't they ever see me? Why did my love have to be earned, while Sophia's was always just assumed? Growing up, she was the sun. Bright, demanding, the center of every orbit. And I was the moon. Only visible when she wasn't shining. I accepted it for years. I even built my life around it. But now the moon had its own gravity. And I wasn't going to dim anymore. The next morning, I flew back to New York. I didn't text anyone goodbye. I didn't explain or apologize. I simply slipped out the way I had slipped into that dinner, unnoticed. Back at my penthouse, a space they still thought was a shared rental, I kicked off my heels and walked barefoot across the hardwood floors. My assistant, Chloe, had stocked the fridge with sparkling water and fresh strawberries. There was a bouquet of white lilies on the kitchen island, with a small note. Board call moved to 9:30. You crushed it last night. Proud of you.
See.
I smiled. Chloe had been with me since the beginning, since the garage office days and ramen dinners. She was more family than most of the people who shared my blood. After a long shower and some quiet, I sat down at my home desk and opened my laptop. Dozens of unread emails. New investment offers. Partnership inquiries. A Forbes request for another interview. They wanted to update the Women in Tech feature they had run last year. I clicked past all of it. Instead, I opened a private file labeled Legacy Project. It had started as a daydream, a way to give back, to pour resources into young women who reminded me of me.
But now?
Now it felt like purpose. A way to reclaim something my family never gave me. Voice. That afternoon, I made a decision. If my family didn't want to celebrate me, I'd build a new table. One where girls like me never had to beg to be seen. 2 weeks passed without a word from my mother, which wasn't entirely surprising. In her world, silence was a punishment. One she assumed would make me crawl back, apologize for making a scene. But this time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I focused on the launch of our newest product, an AI-powered accessibility tool for children with learning disabilities. The beta test had outperformed projections, and 2 major educational tech firms were circling us with partnership offers. That Friday, after a long meeting, I found Chloe standing in the hallway outside my office, her brow furrowed. "There's someone here to see you," she said cautiously. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she won't leave." Before I could ask, the glass door swung open. And there she was, Sophia, in my office. Wearing oversized sunglasses, hair pulled back in a perfect twist, designer bag clutched like a shield. "Nice place," she said, glancing around the room. "Didn't expect it to be this." "This?" I echoed, standing slowly. "What exactly did you expect?" "I don't know," she shrugged. "Maybe some co-working space or a corner desk in someone else's startup." I motioned for Chloe to give us privacy. She nodded and stepped out, but not before throwing me a "You want me to call security?"
Look.
I shook my head. "Not yet." Sophia sat. I didn't. "I'm not here to fight," she said, sighing. I didn't know, Izzy. About all of it." I leaned back against my desk. "You never ask." She blinked. "I didn't think you were capable." I cut in, eyebrows raised. "Worthy? Useful?" Her face flushed. "I didn't mean it like that." "You did," I said calmly. "You meant every word. Because that's how you've always seen me."
Less. Quiet.
Invisible. You didn't bother to look deeper because it was easier to dismiss me than to admit I might have built something without needing your validation. Sophia looked down, chewing the inside of her cheek. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she said, "I'm sorry." Silence. A long, heavy silence. I studied her, really studied her. For the first time, she looked small. Not in stature, but in certainty. Like she had finally realized she wasn't the only one with power. "I'm not interested in revenge, Soph," I said. "I'm not trying to embarrass you. But I won't shrink for you anymore either." "I get that," she whispered. "I think I always knew you were brilliant. I just didn't want to feel like I was the one falling behind." That surprised me. So much of our lives had been built around the narrative that I was the one catching up. It had never occurred to me that she might feel threatened by me, the quiet one. We sat there, sisters but strangers, the weight of a lifetime between us. "I can transfer the condo into your name," I said at last. "If you want." She shook her head.
No.
"You helped me when I didn't deserve it. You still are. I'll figure it out." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. When she left, she paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth," she said, "you were never useless. We just didn't deserve you." Then she walked out. And just like that, the power shifted again. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in clarity. That night, I walked alone through Central Park, the cool breeze tugging at my coat sleeves. I thought about my childhood, about all the times I had wished to be someone else, someone louder, shinier, more likable. But I didn't want that anymore. I liked who I had become, not because of them, but in spite of them. And as the city lights blinked on one by one, I realized something. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, until it's time to speak. And when that time comes, you speak so clearly they can never ignore you again. It had been a month since the dinner, and in that time, something strange had started happening. People in my family began treating me differently, but not in the way I had imagined. I wasn't suddenly bombarded with apologies or flowers. I didn't get late-night texts pouring out regret or invitations to make amends. No, it was quieter than that.
Subtle.
It started with my cousin Valentina tagging me in an old childhood photo on Facebook, something she'd never done before. Then it was Mama sending a random message about a distant relative's wedding, her tone more cautious than usual. And eventually, even Papa forwarded me an article about Latina CEOs and wrote, "Saw this and thought of you." I stared at that message for nearly 10 minutes. He had never thought of me like that.
Not as a CEO.
Not as anything close to that. To him, I had always been the daughter who made things on the computer, never the woman who had 30 employees, a private equity offer pending, and a keynote speech lined up in Paris. It was almost like I had to publicly shatter their perception of me to be treated like I existed. But there was still one person I hadn't heard from again, Sophia. Until the phone rang one rainy Thursday morning. I was in the middle of prepping for a call with investors. Chloe was reviewing notes when my personal line lit up with her name. I stared at it. I didn't want to answer. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what version of Sophia I was about to get. I picked up. "Izzy." Her voice was shaky. "I'm here," I said cautiously. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And it's going to sound insane. Try me." She exhaled. "I just found out my boyfriend, well, ex, was using me to get to your company." I sat up straight.
What? Yeah.
"Lucas. The guy I brought to Christmas last year? He told me he was in real estate, but he's not. He's some middleman for an investor group. Apparently, he found out we were sisters and thought he could use me to pressure you into a buyout. Said if he could get your trust, he'd get a backdoor into the company." My stomach dropped. "I dumped him," she said. "I kicked him out last night. But I feel sick, Izzy. I let him into our family. I let him near you."
My throat was dry.
I had met Lucas once or twice. Slick, charming, all white teeth and tailored jackets. I never liked him, but I hadn't thought much beyond that. "Thank you for telling me," I said slowly. "That couldn't have been easy." There was silence. Then, "I know I messed up before," she said. "But I don't want us to be strangers anymore. And I don't want you to think I only came to your office that day to save face. I came because I miss my sister." I felt a small lump rise in my chest. I wanted to believe her, but I had learned not to confuse a quiet moment of vulnerability with a lasting change. People say all the right things in the middle of crisis. The real test is what they do after the storm passes. "I appreciate the honesty," I said. "And I'm glad you told me. But Sophia, if we rebuild anything, it has to be from scratch. No pretending. No sugarcoating. No erasing what happened." "I know," she whispered. "I'm ready." That night, I added a new note to my legacy project file. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing yourself anyway. I had made peace with the fact that not every relationship can be fully healed. But I also believed in second chances, earned, not given. If Sophia was ready to try, I'd meet her halfway. Not because I owed her, but because I needed to know I could move forward without bitterness. 2 weeks later, we met at a small cafe downtown. No public drama, no confrontation, just two sisters and 2 coffees on a quiet Wednesday morning. "I read your interview in Tech Quarterly," she said, stirring her almond milk latte. "You looked powerful." "Thank you." Also a little terrifying, she added, grinning. Like, wow, she could have me audited with a smile. I laughed. A real one. We talked about everything and nothing, her job in brand marketing, my company's upcoming product launch, our parents' latest gossip. And then, mid-sentence, she said something I never expected. You know, I used to be jealous of you. I blinked. Of me?
Yeah.
You always knew who you were, even when no one else did. I spent so much of my life needing people to clap for me. You didn't. You just kept going. I felt something in me thaw. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that's not awkward, but healing. I have something for you, she said, digging into her bag. She handed me a small, rectangular box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace. On the pendant, a single engraved word.
Seen.
My eyes stung. I just thought, she said, you spent too long being invisible. You deserve to be seen. I stood up and hugged her. Not just a polite family hug, a real one. One that wrapped around years of misunderstanding and let something new begin. Over the next few months, things slowly changed. Not overnight. Not with fanfare. But with intention. Sophia showed up to my TEDx talk. She brought our mother. They sat in the front row. At the end, I saw Mama wiping her eyes. She didn't say much afterward, just hugged me tight and said, I didn't know. I'm proud. It was enough. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with a seat being saved for you that was never offered before. And one morning, as I stood in my office overlooking the city, I realized. They could call me anything they wanted, quiet, different, even useless. But the truth? I had built something they could never take from me. I had built myself. There's something sacred about peace after chaos. After everything that happened, the dinner, the folder, the confrontation with Sophia, I found myself breathing differently. Slower.
Deeper.
Like my lungs were finally expanding into space I hadn't realized I was allowed to occupy. But peace is never permanent. Especially when it's wrapped in family. Just when I thought the dust had finally settled, another storm arrived. This one didn't come with cruel words or eye rolls across the table. It came in the form of a phone call from a number I hadn't seen in years. Isabella. My spine straightened at the sound of his voice. Uncle Mateo. My mother's older brother. The man who once told me, at age 15, that I'd make a good wife one day, maybe even a teacher, but business? That's for the boys. The man who hadn't spoken to me in nearly a decade until now. Uncle Mateo, I said cautiously. This is a surprise. Mija, he said warmly, like nothing had ever happened. I heard about your success. The company, the news articles. Incredible. You've made the family proud. I leaned back in my chair. Thank you. That means a lot. Listen, he continued, his voice lowering slightly. I hate to ask this, but your cousin Julian is in a bit of a bind. Lost some money in a bad investment. And, you know how these tech things go, you make a little magic with numbers, maybe you could help him out. There it was. The ask. It never took long. I closed my eyes. Years ago, I would have said yes. Just to be accepted. Just to feel useful on their terms.
But now?
Now I had boundaries. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, voice steady. But I don't invest in family anymore. It gets too complicated. He paused, surprised.
Ah.
I see. Well, maybe just a loan then? No strings. I smiled. Best of luck to Julian. Then I hung up. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. But that call stirred something inside me. Because deep down I realized I had always been useful. Just not in the way they wanted. They wanted loud success. Something they could brag about at church or post on Facebook. What I had given them, instead, was invisible safety. I was the one who bailed out Sophia's credit card debt without her knowing. The one who paid Mama's back taxes 5 years ago through an anonymous donor. The one who sent money to Tia Anna when her husband was in the hospital, money she thought came from a church friend. And they never knew, because I never told them. I was trying to earn love by being quiet about my giving.
But now?
I was done hiding, not to shame them, but to finally honor myself. That weekend, I organized something I'd been dreaming of for years. A private gala, not for investors, not for tech brothers, but for young Latina entrepreneurs just starting out, women who had big dreams and small bank accounts, women who reminded me of myself. I rented a rooftop space, hired a full mariachi band, and partnered with a nonprofit that offered microloans to minority-led startups. We called it The Legacy We Build. I invited every woman I'd ever mentored, every coder, designer, product manager, founder. Dozens of them came, some flying in from out of state, wearing gowns and tears of disbelief. The energy that night? Electric. But the moment I'll never forget came just before I walked on stage. Sophia showed up, wearing a simple black dress. No camera crew. No Instagram stories. Just her. "I came to support," she said softly. "Not to be seen. Just to witness." I nodded. "Thank you." And as I stood at the podium under the stars, I looked out at the sea of faces and began. There was a time I believed success meant silence, that being strong meant never needing anyone. But what I've learned is this: legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you build so others can rise without asking for permission. Applause.
Tears.
Fire in the air. Later, as people danced and laughed and planned futures, Sophia found me again. "I want to contribute," she said.
To this.
"However I can." "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded.
Yes.
"You changed the narrative, Izzy. I want to be part of that story now, not the old one." I didn't say yes immediately,
Because real change takes time.
but I gave her something I hadn't before: a chance. 2 months later, The Legacy We Build officially became a foundation, with Sophia on the board. I made her prove herself. She showed up to every meeting, late-night planning calls, even flew across the country for a single-hour pitch. She didn't want a spotlight. She wanted to do the work. And maybe that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not a single moment of forgiveness, but 1,000 tiny steps toward trust. Then, just when I thought the story was over, something happened that would change everything. I got a letter. Handwritten. On lined paper. Folded into thirds like an old-school note passed in class. It was from Papa. Inside he wrote only this: "Mija, I didn't know how to be proud of you because I didn't understand what you were doing. But I've been watching. And now I see. Your strength reminds me of your abuela. Quiet. Relentless. Unshakable. I was wrong. I see you now, Papa." I stared at it for a long time. Because sometimes, the words you waited a lifetime to hear don't come with fireworks. Sometimes, they come in ink. And when they do, they change everything. I tucked the letter into my journal, right next to the original printout of the condo deed, the one that started all of this. Not because I needed a reminder of revenge, but because I needed a reminder of becoming. From useless to unmissable. From invisible to unforgettable. From silence to legacy. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that, eventually, you begin to internalize it, even after you've proven everyone wrong. You can be on stage, delivering keynote speeches. You can be featured in magazines called Visionary and Game Changer. But sometimes, when the room is quiet and the applause fades, there's still a small voice in the back of your head whispering, "Are you really enough?" And I'd be lying if I said that voice had disappeared entirely. A few weeks after Papa's letter arrived, I found myself walking into my childhood neighborhood for the first time in years. I hadn't planned on going back, but I'd been invited to speak at a youth entrepreneurship event held at the community center near our old house. I accepted without thinking. It wasn't until I stepped onto that cracked sidewalk, the one that once led me to middle school with secondhand notebooks and dreams too big for my uniform pockets, that I felt the full weight of it. I was going home. Not to our old house, it had been sold long ago, but to the memory of who I used to be. The girl with untamed hair and a laptop that overheated after 15 minutes. The girl who learned to code using free libraries and spotty internet. The one who was told she was too quiet, too plain, too soft. And maybe for a long time I believed them. That's why the words, "you're useless," had cut so deep. Not because I thought they were true anymore, but because I used to believe they were. Sophia had dragged that buried insecurity into the light, in front of everyone. But that same night, I'd burned it to the ground. The event was small, humble, but buzzing with energy. A dozen young girls, some in jeans, some in school uniforms, waited for me in a semicircle of plastic chairs. Their eyes were wide, not because I was famous, but because I looked like them. One of them raised her hand before I even began. "Miss Marquez," she said shyly, "how did you know you were like enough to do all this?" I blinked. There it was. The real question. Not how I did it or what I built, but who I had to become to believe I could. I walked toward her and crouched down to meet her eyes. "I didn't know," I said softly. "Not at first. I just knew I couldn't let other people decide for me anymore." Then I stood up and looked at the whole room. "When people call you useless," I said, "what they really mean is, you don't fit my expectations. Don't shrink to fit them. Build something so big, they have to reshape their view of what's possible." The girls clapped. A few of them wiped their eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt even at my company's biggest moments. Healed. On the way back, I stopped at a bakery I used to visit as a kid. The same old woman still worked there, her hair now completely silver. She didn't recognize me. Not until I handed her my card. "Wait," she said, squinting. "Isabella Marquez." I smiled. "That's me." She beamed. "Your mama used to bring you here. You always carried that little blue notebook." I laughed. "I still have it." We talked for a while, about time, about change, about how people leave, but places stay. As I walked out with a box of pastries, she called after me. "Hey, Mija. Don't forget who you were before they told you who to be." It stopped me cold. Because that's exactly what I'd done for years. I'd tried so hard to become someone they'd finally approve of when really, I was enough the whole time. That night, I sat in my penthouse, barefoot on the sofa, that little blue notebook in my lap. Inside were the earliest sketches of my first product. Scribbles, ideas, dreams. The same dreams they had once called useless. I picked up my pen and wrote something new on the last page. You never needed their permission. You just needed your own. The next day, Sophia called me. "I've been thinking," she said. "You know how people are always asking you to mentor them?" I hummed. "All the time." "Well, what if we launched a platform? Like mentorship for underrepresented girls in tech, curated by you, organized by me?" I blinked. "That's actually brilliant." She laughed. "You think I'm finally catching up? I think you're finally standing beside me." We brainstormed for hours. The platform would be called No Permission. Because that's what we wanted to give, freedom to dream without waiting for approval. The team loved it. The board approved it. Investors offered to back it. And just like that, the sister who once called me useless became my co-founder in something that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with impact. A month later, we held the soft launch. 1,000 girls signed up within the first week. And as we stood on stage together at the announcement gala, Sophia and me, side by side, she turned and whispered, "Do you forgive me?" I looked at her, not with anger, not with pity,
But with peace. "I already did," I said.
"The moment I chose to keep building instead of breaking." She nodded. "You always were the builder. I just never saw it." "You weren't supposed to," I said. "Not back then. I was still building me." And that night, as the city glittered around us, I didn't feel like a woman who had proven her worth. I felt like a woman who had never needed to. 2 years passed. Not in a blur, but in quiet evolution. The girl they once called useless had grown into a woman the world now called formidable. A builder, a leader, a symbol, though I never wanted to be anyone's symbol. I just wanted to be. No Permission was no longer just a mentorship platform. It had expanded into a movement, funding scholarships, offering internships, placing young Latina coders in companies that had never hired anyone who looked like them before. It was what I'd wished existed when I was a kid typing code on a secondhand laptop in my bedroom, hoping anyone would believe in me. Now I was that someone. For thousands. Sophia and I worked together better than I ever imagined possible. She had vision, drive, and a gift for seeing the gaps between people and possibility. For every spreadsheet I built, she built a story. For every cold, hard plan I structured, she softened the edges with humanity. We still fought because sisters fight. But we fought as partners now. Not competitors. But one thing remained unfinished. Mama. She hadn't come to any of the launch events. She hadn't visited my office or even asked about the platform. She sent occasional messages, polite and distant, like someone filling a quota for maternal responsibility. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. She had softened toward me since the dinner. But softness isn't the same as love. It's not the same as respect. And I needed to know why.
It was Sophia who nudged me.
Talk to her, she said one evening as we sipped café con leche in my kitchen. You've confronted everyone else in this story but her. I stared out the window. What if I don't like what I hear? Then at least you'll stop carrying the weight of wondering. So I called her. And she answered. We met at her house, a small, sunlit home outside Coral Gables, surrounded by roses. She still pruned herself. She opened the door and just looked at me, as if seeing me was still a surprise. Hola, mija, she said quietly. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten arroz con pollo at as a kid, the same one where I once cried over a math test, and where no one ever asked what I really dreamed of doing. I didn't come here for closure, I began. I came for clarity. She nodded, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that shook slightly. I want to know, I said, why it was so hard for you to see me. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years. My little blue notebook. I blinked. You kept it. She smiled sadly. Of course. I read it when you weren't looking. I didn't understand it, but it felt important. Then why did you always act like none of it mattered? I asked, my voice cracking. Why was I never enough? She sat back down and stared at her hands. Because you reminded me of myself, she said at last. And I never thought I was enough either. That stopped me. I was quiet too, she said. Always thinking, always planning. But I married young, became a mother before I found my voice. I gave up my dreams so early, I started resenting people who still had theirs. She looked up, eyes wet. And you were everything I wasn't brave enough to be. So, I punished you for it. I couldn't speak. Tears welled in my throat, my chest, my whole body. Not out of anger, but because suddenly it all made sense. The distance, the dismissiveness, the silence. She hadn't hated me. She had feared me. Or more precisely, what I represented. Freedom.
Power.
Unapologetic becoming. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not just for what I said or didn't say, but for not loving you loudly enough. I reached for her hand. We cried together. Two women. Two generations. Both finally released from years of misunderstanding. That night, I drove home with a blue notebook on the passenger seat. When I got to my apartment, I placed it on the shelf beside my Forbes award, my first patent certificate, and the signed deed to my New York office building. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of where it all started. The final chapter came a few months later at a ceremony honoring women in technology. I'd been nominated as Innovator of the Year. As I stood at the podium in a room of 500, I took a moment to breathe. I was once called useless, I began. And I believed it. Not because it was true, but because it was repeated enough to sound like truth. I paused. But today, I don't speak to prove them wrong. I speak to remind the next girl who hears those same words. You are never useless when you're building something no one understands yet. Thunderous applause. Sophia beamed in the front row. Mama stood beside her, wiping tears. And as I stepped off the stage, a young girl no older than 12 reached for my hand. Miss Marquez, she said, eyes wide, I want to be like you. I knelt beside her. No, Mija, I whispered. You be better. Because the best revenge isn't success. It's becoming the person they said you never could be, and then helping others do the same.